I was lacing up my boots when my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I almost didn't check it. I was already running 10 minutes late, and my sister-in-law always made a point of commenting when anyone arrived after her. But something made me glance down. It was my accountant, Daniel. 3 words in the preview. Call me now. I stood there with one boot half tied, staring at the screen. Daniel had been my late husband's accountant before he became mine. In 4 years, he had never once texted me on a Sunday morning. Not when tax season buried him. Not when Marcus died. Not once. I called him back before I even finished reading. He picked up on the first ring. "Don't go to brunch," he said. "No, hello. No, sorry to bother you." Just that. I sat down slowly on the bench by the door. "Daniel, what's going on? I need you to come to my office." "Today. I know it's Sunday. I'm already here." A pause. "And Rebecca, do not sign anything. If anyone puts a document in front of you today, you walk away. Promise me." I promised him. Then I sat there for another full minute after we hung up, staring at the wall of our front hallway. Marcus's coat was still on the hook by the door. I hadn't been able to move it. It had been 14 months. I called my sister-in-law and told her I wasn't feeling well. She was warm about it, told me to rest, said she'd save me a plate. She sounded exactly like she always did, gentle, a little concerned, already moving on to the next topic. I had no idea then what Daniel was about to show me. I had no idea that the woman I'd just spoken to, the one who called me sweetheart and asked about my sleep, had spent the past 8 months trying to take everything Marcus had left me. Let me back up. Marcus and I met at a charity auction in Ottawa when I was 28 and he was 34. He was quiet in the way that confident people sometimes are. He didn't need to fill every silence. He ran a mid-sized commercial refrigeration company that his father had started in the 70s, supplying equipment to grocery chains, food distributors, restaurants across Ontario and Quebec. It wasn't glamorous, but it was solid, profitable, built on 30 years of relationships and a reputation that Marcus had spent his entire adult life protecting. We got married 2 years after we met. We didn't have children. We talked about it, but Marcus was diagnosed with an aggressive form of ALS 18 months into our marriage, and everything shifted. The next 2.5 years were about living as fully as we could inside the narrowing window we had. He passed away 14 months before that Sunday morning. Marcus's family had always been polite to me. His younger sister Diane and her husband Greg had been at every birthday, every holiday, every cottage weekend. His mother, who lived in a senior's residence in Kingston, sent me cards on my birthday even after Marcus died. On the surface, we were fine. But Marcus had known something I hadn't fully understood until it was too late. A month before he died, sitting in the living room with the afternoon light coming in low, he told me that Diane had asked him twice whether he had considered leaving the business to her instead of to me. She had framed it as concern. She'd said things like, "You've put so much into this, Marcus. It should stay in the family," he'd told her, patiently, that I was his family. She hadn't brought it up again while he was alive. He had updated his will 6 weeks before he passed. Everything came to me, the house, the investment accounts, and his controlling share of the company. He'd left Diane a meaningful sum, $120,000, which she received without comment at the reading. I had thought, naively, that the settlement of the estate had closed something. I drove to Daniel's office that Sunday with the heat turned all the way up even though it wasn't that cold. My hands felt strange on the wheel. He met me at the door of the building himself, which he had never done before. He is a measured man, Daniel. He irons his shirts on weekends. He uses a paper day planner. He does not panic, but standing there in the parking lot of his building in Canada, in jeans and a fleece, he looked like a man who had not slept. He didn't say anything until we were sitting down. Then he opened his laptop, turned it toward me, and showed me an email. It had been sent from an address that looked, at first glance, exactly like mine, the same name, the same basic structure, but the domain was off by one character, a small difference, the kind you miss when you're reading quickly. The email had been sent to the company's corporate lawyer 6 weeks earlier, and it appeared to be from me. It said that I had decided to consult with my family about the future of the business and that I was open to discussing a transfer of my shares to a family trust, one that would be managed jointly by myself and Diane. I read it 3 times. I had never written that email. I had never used the phrase family trust in my life in relation to the company. I had no idea this email existed. "There's more," Daniel said. Over the next hour, he walked me through everything he had found. He had only discovered it because he'd been doing a routine review of the company's correspondence file in preparation for the annual audit. something he did every January without fail, and he'd noticed the thread. The spoofed email was the opening move. In the weeks that followed it, someone had used it as a reference point to begin a quiet, methodical process. The corporate lawyer, a man named Paul, who had been with the company since Marcus's father's era and who, it turned out, had a long social friendship with Greg, had taken the email at face value. He had begun preparing documents. Not finalizing them, not yet, but preparing them. A restructuring proposal, a shareholder agreement amendment. A document that, if I had signed it, would have transferred operational control of the company to a newly formed family trust, with Diane holding equal authority over all major decisions. Once that was in place, Daniel explained, it would have been a matter of time. With equal control, Diane could block decisions, stall operations, create enough friction to force a buyout, and she'd already had an offer ready. He had found a draft letter of intent from a private equity firm, one that Greg had a prior consulting relationship with, to purchase the company at a price that was roughly 40% below fair market value. They had been planning to walk me into that room, sit me down with Paul, and present the whole package as a routine estate-related restructuring. The kind of thing a young widow, still grieving, not deeply familiar with corporate law, might sign without fully understanding. I sat very still while Daniel talked. I kept thinking about Diane's voice on the phone that morning. Rest, sweetheart. I'll save you a plate. She had been running this operation for 8 months. She had done it while bringing me soup when I had a cold in November. She had done it while sitting next to me at Marcus's memorial service in the spring. She had done it while texting me photos of her garden and asking if I wanted to come for dinner. How did they spoof the email? I asked. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Daniel told me that the IT consultant he'd called the night before, he'd called someone the moment he found it, at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night, believed Greg had likely set it up. Greg worked in software sales. He would have known how to do it, or known someone who did. The domain had been registered 8 months ago, 2 weeks after what would have been Marcus and my 4th wedding anniversary. I drove home. I sat in the driveway for a while without going inside. Then I called a lawyer. Not Paul. A different lawyer entirely, a woman named Catherine who specialized in corporate litigation and whom I had met once at a fundraiser and whose card I had kept for no reason I could have explained at the time. I called her on a Sunday and left a message, and she called me back within the hour. Don't move anything, she told me. Don't respond to any communications about the company. Don't let them know you know. Can you do that? I said I could. Good. And get me everything Daniel has. Every email, every document, every draft. If what you're describing is accurate, what they've done already constitutes fraud. The spoofed email alone is a criminal code matter. I want to tell you something about the weeks that followed, because I think people imagine that when something like this happens, you feel furious. And I did feel furious, eventually. But the first thing I felt was something closer to grief. Not for myself, exactly. For what I had believed Diane was. For every real moment that now had a question mark next to it. When she cried at Marcus's funeral, had that been real? When she held my hand in the hospital during those last weeks, had she been thinking about the company? I genuinely didn't know. I still don't. That uncertainty was its own particular kind of loss. But I also knew, with a clarity that surprised me, that Marcus had trusted me to protect what he built. He had spent 30 years watching his father build it and another 10 years building it further himself. He had chosen to leave it to me not as an afterthought, but as a deliberate act. He had told me, more than once, that he believed in what I would do with it. I was not going to let it be taken. Catherine moved carefully and quickly. The first thing she did was retain a digital forensics firm to document the spoofed email domain and trace its registration. That took 10 days and produced a clean, detailed report that placed the domain registration on a date, tied to an IP address, linked to a device that would later be traced to Greg. The second thing she did was obtain the full correspondence between Paul and the unknown party over the prior 8 months, all of it, through a formal legal process that Paul had no choice but to comply with once he understood the nature of what was being investigated. Paul, to his credit, cooperated immediately. I think he had felt something was off and had told himself it wasn't his job to ask questions. He was not a bad man. He had made a serious error in judgment. The third thing was the part I had to do myself. Catherine needed me to have a recorded conversation with Diane. Not an ambush, nothing manufactured. Just a real conversation, in which I let Diane talk, and in which, ideally, she said something that confirmed her knowledge of the scheme. In Canada, you can legally record a conversation you are a party to, and Catherine had walked me through every detail of how to do it properly. Diane called me herself, 3 weeks after that Sunday morning. She called to check in, she said, to see how I was holding up, to mention, casually, that she'd heard from Paul that there were some estate-related documents that still needed to be sorted out and that she'd be happy to come with me to meet with him if I found that kind of thing overwhelming. I kept my voice completely even. I said that sounded helpful. I said I had been finding a lot of the legal and administrative stuff hard to navigate on my own. I said I appreciated her. She said, "That's what family is for." I let her keep talking. She mentioned the meeting with Paul. She said she thought it would be straightforward. She said that Greg had been looking into some options that might make managing Marcus's estate much simpler going forward, that it might actually take a lot of pressure off me. She said the word simplify 4 times in one conversation. At one point, I asked, as neutrally as I could, whether this was something that would affect my ownership of the company. There was a pause that lasted exactly long enough. "Oh, it's really more of a structural thing," she said. "Just to make sure everything is organized properly. It wouldn't change anything that matters." I thanked her. I told her I'd look forward to the meeting. I hung up and sat on my kitchen floor for a few minutes, not crying, just breathing. I sent the recording to Catherine that evening. The meeting with Paul was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in February. I arrived with Catherine. I did not tell Diane or Greg I was bringing her. When they walked into Paul's boardroom and saw me sitting there with a corporate litigation lawyer and a printed file folder in front of me, Diane's expression did something complicated. Greg went very still. Catherine spoke first. She outlined, in clear and specific terms, exactly what they had done. The spoofed email, the fraudulent communications, the prepared documents, the draft letter of intent with the private equity firm, the recorded conversation, the forensic report on the domain registration. Greg tried to say something about a misunderstanding. Catherine let him finish and then told him, without raising her voice, that the forensic report had traced the domain registration to a device registered in his name and that a misunderstanding was not a legal category she was prepared to work with today. Diane started to cry. I had prepared myself for this moment. I had thought about it a lot. Actually, what I would feel when I saw her cry. And sitting there, I found that I felt something unexpected. I didn't feel angry or satisfied or sad. I felt very, very tired. Tired of all of it. Tired of the months of lying. Tired of the version of our relationship that had apparently never fully existed. I did not say anything. I let Catherine do her job. By the end of that meeting, Greg and Diane had agreed, with their own hastily retained lawyer on the phone, to sign a document acknowledging their role in the scheme, surrendering any claim against the company or the estate, and repaying the full cost of the forensic investigation and legal fees. In exchange, Catherine had agreed at my instruction to refer the matter to the RCMP, but not to push for an immediate charge, with the understanding that the terms of the agreement would be fully disclosed to the RCMP and that any violation would result in our full cooperation with criminal proceedings. I did not do this because I forgave them. I want to be honest about that. I did it because a prolonged criminal trial would have meant months of uncertainty hanging over the company, over its employees, over every supplier and client relationship Marcus had spent his life building. I had 41 people on payroll. I was not going to let their livelihoods sit in limbo because Diane and Greg had made a choice. Paul retired shortly afterward. He sent me a letter that I read once, and then put away. The company is doing well. I brought in a new corporate lawyer, a woman I found through Catherine, and we spent the first 6 months of the year conducting a full operational review. There were things I changed and things I kept exactly as Marcus had built them. I didn't go to the cottage that summer. I didn't go to any of the family gatherings. Marcus's mother still sends me birthday cards. I send one back. I have not spoken to Diane since the boardroom. There are days when I drive past the exit for Kingston on the highway, and I think about the version of things where none of this happened, where she actually was who I thought she was, where Marcus's family and I had figured out how to become something real. I let myself think about that for exactly as long as it takes to pass the exit sign. Then I put both hands on the wheel and I drive. Marcus used to say that the most important thing in any business, more than the margins, more than the contracts, was knowing who you could trust when it was inconvenient to trust them. I used to think he was talking about vendors and clients. I understand now that he was talking about everything. The company will turn 50 years old next spring. I have already started planning the event. We're going to hold it in the warehouse in Nepean where Marcus's father first assembled his team, the same building, still standing, still ours. I have not moved his coat from the hook by the door, but I've stopped pretending I'm going to. Some things you keep not because you're stuck, but because they remind you exactly what you were protecting all along.